Hi, I'm Stephen Travers. Perspective doesn't have to be hard. Perspective simply means how something looks from a certain place. If I look at something from here, or if I move over here, or move over here, or move up to here, how something looks will change according to the position I'm looking at it from. Its perspective will change. There's nothing difficult about that. And perspective affects everything, not just buildings, but people and trees and cars. But because buildings are generally large and basically quite simple shapes, it's more obvious with them. And so if we don't get it right, it stands out more that there's something wrong with how we've drawn this object. Now, I draw scenes with some pretty complicated perspective. A comment I often get is that my perspective is very good. And I think it's because I have a very simple, basic way of thinking about perspective that just helps anchor me in the right place in my thinking when I draw. And that's what I want to share with you. Even though those three drawings really have very complex perspective, the principles is the basic principle really that I'm going to share now. And when I'm drawing, in terms of perspective, I think about three lines. I think about a top line, a bottom line, and an eye level line. 3 lines. It's as simple as that. But I think it's going to be easier if I show you what I mean. So, we need a top line, a bottom line, and an eye line. And in between those 3 lines, we have more lines. Now, whether these are actual lines, just make clear the eye line, whether these are actual lines or just guidelines doesn't really matter. The thing to remember at this point is that if we were to continue these lines off the page, they would meet. All these lines would meet at the same place. And they would meet on the eye level line. So this is just approximate, but this is how it is in reality. The top line, the bottom line, if you draw them till they meet, they actually meet on the eye line, and every other line in between will meet. And the important thing to see is that these lines increase in angle as you go from the eye line up towards the highest line, the top line. The angle steadily increases, and it's the same in between the eye line and the bottom perspective line. That's important. So if we were to draw a part of a building within this guideline, let's say we put a wall here. Okay, so here's a wall. Okay, and let's say we want to put some windows in to our wall. We'll make them tall windows. And we'll put a doorway in. Okay, now that looks quite good. The perspective of all of that looks fine because all of these perspective lines angle correctly, because if you take them to their vanishing point, they all hit the same spot in line with the eye level. Now, let's say I wanted to add some extra bits to the roof, maybe some square bases for some statues, little statues. So again, I need to add now a guideline, and I need to take it back to the vanishing point. So in my mind, I just need to have a sense of where that line's going to be so that I can draw that the right way. And of course, you don't really have to draw these lines in life. As we get more experienced at this, we can just sort of sense where they're going to go. Now, of course, this is just a 2-dimensional, this could be like a cardboard cutout sticking up. It doesn't have 3 dimensions because we've just got one side of the building. But if we imagine this going into another direction, the same principles flipped, Now, the vanishing point doesn't have to be as far away. It can be closer, it can be further away. Depends on the angle we're viewing the building. But the top and the bottom lines will meet on that same eye level. But we'll just keep it simple here, and we'll make it a very narrow building. Here we go. And all the lines that go this direction, all will go to that same point. All of these lines will all go to that same imaginary point. And so, as we can see, perspective-wise, that works really well. So let's look at this, though, not with a sort of a basic simplified example, but let's look at it with some real drawings that I've done. Now, here's a scene in Paris, and what we can see is that part of the building we're just seeing straight on. So there's no real perspective there because we're seeing it flat. That's okay. But down this side here, we can see that there is perspective. And if we look, we can see that the perspective is quite steep. And this is what we call one-point perspective. This is where there's only one vanishing point because we're parallel to this, so we don't see it. So basically, there is one vanishing point that we have to worry about in this picture, which is this one. So this is sort of the simplest way we can draw perspective, just having to think about it in one direction to one vanishing point. Here's another building. This one's in Sydney. And again, we can see that there's very strong perspective here. It's a little more complicated simply because the ground's not level. But what we can see is that clearly, as in the example I just drew, there are two vanishing points. Because of the angle of the building, the perspective slopes off in two directions to two vanishing points. Okay, so this is two-point perspective. You've probably heard of that. And finally, a final example is the Kelvin Museum in Glasgow. And again, we can see that on one side, we've got perspective. On the other side, we've got perspective. But the additional thing we have in this drawing is we have a vertical perspective. We can see that there are actually perspective lines going straight up. And although we can't see it here, we can see that if these lines were continued straight up, they would meet at some point. And this is called three-point perspective because there is 1, 2, 3 vanishing points. And although this might look more complicated, the principle is exactly the same. The principle is exactly the same that we thought about here. Each vanishing point has a top line, a bottom line, and if we work at having a sense of where the vanishing point is, and we don't have to know it exactly, but we angle every line between the top and bottom line so that the angle keeps increasing. Then every line we draw in between, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 vanishing points, will be in the right place. And that's how simple it is. So that's how I think when I draw about perspective. I find the top line, the bottom line, the eye level line, and every line in between has to line up in the right way between those two lines. And I find that keeps me accurate. And I keep it at that simple level, however complex the perspective in the drawing is. The real challenge is to actually see the perspective accurately in the drawing or in the scene before I start to draw. It's always worth investing a few minutes looking carefully at what we want to draw before we put pencil or pen to paper. Now, of course, there is more complexity. There are further things I could go into about perspective than this, but I wanted to keep it really short and really simple. If you'd like perhaps some more videos on greater complexity with perspective, looking at further aspects of it, please let me know. Put it in the comments below. If you found this helpful, please hit like, subscribe if you'd like to see more videos, and otherwise, I'll see you next time.